Just before we start and I introduce our speaker and moderator, there are a couple of housekeeping items to get off our list. The first of which being to remind you that this talk will be about an hour, 15 minutes. At the 1 hour mark, we will have our awesome ushers go around with pens and cards if you have questions for the speaker, so that you can write down the question, then our moderator will read out the questions towards the end. The other being, as you have your mobile phones on you, can I ask right this moment that everyone puts their phones on silent? Not vibrate. The vibration is like a small generator in your pocket. We can hear it. And we would love for you guys to pay close attention. Obviously, no phone calls during this time. And can I also ask that you please restrict your movements? If you don't have to get up, please do not get up, because it will distract the people around you as well as the cameras. And that being said, let's move on to introduce our speaker and moderator for today. So first up, we will have Joel Benson, who is the first African to win recognition at the Venice Film Festival's virtual reality category, which I think is amazing. Can we please just a little round of applause for that? He won this year's award for the Best VR Immersive Story for Linear Content. And he'll be speaking with Ugoma Adegoke, who is not just a fantastic human, but she's the founder of Bloom Art Gallery, as well as Lights Camera Africa Film Festival. So she'll be discussing with him about his recent work in VR, and the conversation will highlight his quest to document the practices, work, and spaces of contemporary modern artists in Nigeria using this medium. So I will let them continue this conversation, so please make them very welcome to the stage.
Hello.
Mic check, mic check.
Hi, good evening. I'm very happy to be here because just about a month ago, Joel and I, we were connected a bit virtually, virtual reality, when I had the pleasure at the Lights Camera Africa, which is my other day job, and we were very privileged to be the first festival and probably the first public platform where Daughters of Chibok, the film that you won the Golden Lion for, was screened. So we have a long history. I have always been on the side of presenting Joel's work as an artist, and now Joel seems to be doing that for many other artists, which we'll delve into in the context of him now beginning to document artists through virtual reality. I wanted to just, the title of our talk is Modern Art in 360 Degrees. I would like us to sort of focus a bit on Joel and his practice, but just to provide a bit of a backdrop as to probably the hunger that he and maybe many of us, myself included as a gallerist, to document the past, to document the influences that have brought us all to this wonderful contemporary fire in our world today through the arts. So I would like to just paint that picture first. And I wanted to just read a few things before we go into sort of some specific questions about other artists that Joel would like to document in VR. I just wanted to ask, has anyone seen The Realities of Demas, which is showing in the room next door? Have you actually seen Joel's latest creation, which was commissioned by Artex, which is actually showing in that? Okay, so, all right. So again, just to bring it closer to home, he has just created a virtual reality film, which you must actually see, please, and basically brings to life the studio practice, the life of one of the most important artists and one of the foremost pioneers of modernism in Nigeria. And many of us read, many of us have watched documentaries about Demas Moko, but from a personal experience, it's just amazing to see how Joel is able to transform the entire experience of learning about Demas Moko. I know a few architecture students were dumbstruck. And so it just makes me again think about how compelling this medium is to really get us emotional and get us moving about this task of documenting, first of all, understanding and contextualizing where we are, but then documenting our now, our past, so that we can probably go forward. So I'm going to read this. It's an excerpt from another father of modernism in Nigeria, Adegoke, and just to sort of paint a picture about maybe the call to action that I think is at the basis of Joel's new obsession. Adegoke is one of the original members of the Zaria Art Society, and I quote, "Our discussions on art generally and on our culture, our great devotion to the study of African art idioms and art forms are all of immense value to us and have opened up new worlds of thought to us all. We now are aware of the fact that our art should be based on our past, present, and possibly on our future ways of life in this country. In all, we are fully aware of our responsibilities as Nigerian artists. We know that art is a fallow field in this country and one that has unfortunately suffered from the hands of the short-sighted schemers of our inadequate educational system. The unfortunate position into which we are thrown calls for hard work, and we have right from the beginning dedicated ourselves, our very beings, to champion the cause of art in Nigeria and indeed Africa. In our difficult work of building up a true modern African art to be cherished and appreciated for its own sake, not only for its functional values, we are inspired by the struggle of such modern artists as Orozco and his compatriots. We must fight to free ourselves from mirroring foreign culture. This great work demands willpower, originality, and above all, love for our fatherland. We must have our own schools, independent of European and Oriental schools, but drawing as much as possible from what we consider in our clear judgment to be the cream of these influences and wedding them to our native art culture. We shall be found out if we shirk the responsibility of working out this experiment to the best of our ability." We just shared this just before we came in. So obviously you now have this task. I think that if this was written in 1960, and this was the manifesto of the Zaria Art Society, and I don't know, most of us would probably agree that he could be reading that in 2019 in terms of like laying the lines and laying the baselines for what it is to be an artist and the responsibilities of artists. So Joel, I just want us to go straight into you telling me a bit about why, first of all, you started, what your interest in was documenting artists, because I know that before this VR project, you already were documenting artists. You did a film, an accidental film, on Nike Okundai Davis. Could you tell me about your first foray into documenting artists visually?
I mean, with arts, it's like childlike wonder. I see these beautiful things that, if you left me there with a canvas and a paintbrush for the next 10 years, I would never come up with anything. And I see these things and I'm really fascinated, right? So this day, I'm with my friends, they're making a music video in this place. I say, okay, let's go together. And I walk into this, it's like Alice in Wonderland type situation. It's paintings all over the walls, like 3 floors. I'm like, where is this place? What's going on here? And this is maybe 7, 8 years ago. And they say, oh, it's an art gallery in Lagos. I said yes. So I walk up to Mama Nike and I say to her, Mama, I want to make a short film on you and this place. I mean, obviously she thought I was joking, and I said, no, I want to do it. And the next day, I took a couple of guys who went there and spent the whole day with her. And it was just this really beautiful experience, because what happened was, I think towards the end of the day, some people came to visit her, so they had this dance performance, and she was choreographing and all that stuff. It was just really beautiful, and it made it into the film. And so for me, why did I decide to document it? First of all, so when I go to these places and have these experiences, I always want to share them. And the only way I can share them beyond just talking about it is to show, right? And so that was it for me. being able to document this and show it to people. And I remember the moment we were done, I just put it online on my Vimeo page and, told everyone, I've made this beautiful story about this beautiful woman. I remember that, in fact, a couple of years later, I was what would I call it, selected for a fellowship to come study film in the States. And they asked me, so can you show us anything you've done? And I said, well, go to my Vimeo page. And I remember the guy called me back and said, hey, we saw this beautiful short film you made on this African woman, and we love it. And, we think you're like a right fit for this program. So yeah, that's it for me, being able to document these experiences that I have, that I really love, for now, for posterity to share. That's it.
Tell me a bit more about your own, sort of your upbringing, because you are now almost inextricably linked to artists. When I think about your career that I've observed so far, there's just artistry all over the place, whether it's in, the music that you're choosing for your work, whether it's in the collaborations behind and even in front of the screen. So why artists? Why not mechanics? Why not regular people? But what is it about visual artists that has sort of hooked you?
I mean, it's the same thing that I just said. It's what I find it really fascinating. I'm drawn to photography. I'm a filmmaker. I make videos. And so I guess there's some things that you see and you just fall in love. You want to be around these things. You want to be around in these spaces. You want to consume as much as you can of this material. And that's it. Okay, so this picture, for instance, is a still from the film that we made on Pao Jekere. All right, and I remember Uncle Tam Fiofori, I was telling him I wanted to make another film, and I wanted to be an artist. And so he said, oh, I know the right person, let's go and see him. And we go and we meet Pao Jekere, and he was showing us these amazing pictures that he took 30, 40 years ago. I'm like, haba. So has anybody done anything on you, sir? No. Okay, no wahala, we'll do it. And that's it for me. First of all, it's really about documenting. That's all it is for me. Document it, keep it, share it as much as possible. I think that something very important that I was told some years ago is that as an artist, I have a responsibility. As a filmmaker, I have a responsibility. And I should take it very seriously. It's not just making films for film's sake. They should have a purpose. They should have a meaning. And I think documenting things like this have a meaning because 6 months after we made this film, he passed on. So he's no longer here with us. Right? Apart from the book, the film is probably all that we have to remember, this man and his time that he spent here. All right? So, and I think that that's useful material, very valuable material for future generations.
I also saw the documentary that you did. In that role, you were the co-director of the documentary on J.D. Ohio Jekere. J.D. Ohio Jekere was a pioneering photographer who was very, very articulate and meticulous about documenting Nigeria through his eyes. And you were very fortunate because you probably met a lot of arranged material. Yeah. Because from every account of Ojekere, we know that he was so organized. Unfortunately, as you just said, this documentary was premiered, and shortly after that he died. So, of course, in terms of your mission to document for archival purposes and for posterity, you've done Nigeria great service on that. But I wanted to maybe just you to talk a bit more about VR. So you've done this two-dimensional film with J.D. Ohio Jekere, yeah. And because I want us to discuss these artists and sort of to discuss these artists in relation to possible virtual reality projects. So he's gone. So this is one of the late artists, important to our art history, important when we're talking about the history of photography and design, even architecture in Nigeria. Yeah. What are the possibilities of going deeper into the Ojekere archive to create something? What is there? what did you see when you interviewed him, when you and Uncle Tam were making this film?
Yeah.
Were there any interesting things in that, environment
Yeah.
that you could make transport it even deeper? Because I remember when we first spoke, you said VR is great, is especially great for taking us to places we ordinarily cannot go to.
Yeah.
And of course, certain artists, of course, rely, a bit stronger on the spaces to create the work.
Yeah.
So I don't know how eerie Ojekere's space was. I don't know how important maybe seeing very, very organized files would be to like a possible VR film, or nothing.
I mean, I don't know. I would have to revisit it and look at it with a new set of eyes, right? I just started making virtual reality last year. So prior to that, when I made this film, I didn't know anything about VR. If I go back there now, I'd have to look around again and say, okay, how can I interpret this, in VR? And I always say also that not every film should be in VR. I'm not the expert, but that's my opinion. Yes, not every film should be in VR. Some films are great as flatties, right? And some, yes, how interesting is this space? How much can you bring out of it? How long can you engage the viewers? So those are all questions that I would have to ask myself. But and then also because he's no longer around, I'll ask myself again. So how well maintained has been the space since he left, and is it good enough to document using this medium? Those are all questions that I would ask. A lot of questions, but I hope you definitely find answers. The answer could be a yes or a no. I'll follow my heart.
We talked recently as well, so maybe this might. Tamfio Fori is someone you've also collaborated with very extensively. He's also involved in this new VR work that you just created. Yeah. Tamfio Fori has a treasure trove of photographic work that is relevant to, again, our history, is relevant for educational purposes, is relevant for the archive. It fits all the bills. Would Tamfio Fori be a subject that's interesting enough for you to venture into through virtual reality? Because you've worked closely, probably the closest in this space with Tamfio Fori.
Yeah,
I'm actually just pitching for a project. I want someone to document Tamfio Fori, so maybe.
Well, when you mentioned the first, I told you that Tamfio Fori is not someone I want to make a 7-minute film on or a 10-minute film. And so the thing about VR is that, the rule of thumb is as much as you can, don't try to go beyond 15 minutes, keeping people in that immersive state, right? Tamfio Fori, I want to do a 1-hour film on him. I want to spend all that. Maybe in that time I can make a 10-minute piece for VR. It could be like a virtual gallery. There's an interesting thing that we did with the film on Pardemas, where we had this white space and we put his works in like this virtual gallery space, and yeah, you could do stuff like that, but how long can you keep that on for, right? So I know you've been pitching this for a while. I don't know if you're going to succeed in making me change my mind about documenting Uncle Tam in VR. But it's something worth considering. I'll think about it. I don't know, but I definitely know that he needs to be documented. But for now, what I'm thinking is maybe as a 2D film. Yes, because he has so much to say. There are so many things, and I don't think I would be doing him justice or his story to just condense it into a 10-minute film. His life, his works, the things that he's done. Yesterday he came by the studio and he came to present me with 2 pictures, right? Just out of the blues, just like that. And it was a picture that he took just recently, 2014, just 5 years ago. And he's been taking pictures since the 70s or the 60s. He has, like you said, a treasure trove of images. You want to spend time and really showcase that, yes. Yeah.
One of the images that just came on
Yeah,
the screen
Muraina.
was of Susan Wenger, and we'll talk a bit more about Susan Wenger and some of the Oshogbo artists. I think very important to the base of modernism and sort of where we are and why we're talking about these pasts is, I guess maybe there was a sense of rebellion, a sense of experimentation that artists like Susan Wenger inspired, which also then inspired artists like Muraino Yelami. Susan Wenger also, when we think about her, we think not just only about of course, the body of work, right? And I think she might be someone who I would love you to sort of paint me a picture of what a possible project could be, because apart from the body of work, she is someone who created beautiful spaces, who lived in a beautiful and very interesting space, which is not, we can't disconnect from her work, we can't disconnect it from her essence. And even just recently, I was fortunate to witness an exhibition in London at the Barbican, which basically takes us through various modernisms across the world and the role that space plays in these movements. Some of those movements were so powerful that they had to recreate them in physicality. So the Mbari Mbayo space was recreated, and of course that space is surrounded all by sculptures that Susan Wenger made. So you've been to her space in Oshogbo, her house, not the Groves, but her house. But of course, Susan Wenger, is that someone who you would share a story with through virtual reality? Someone like Susan Wenger?
Yes, the house is
Tell us a bit about some of the things you've seen there that inspired you.
well, I mean, just stand outside from the road and look at the house. It's like an art piece, right? And I keep talking about why I think VR is important, taking people to these places that they ordinarily would not be able to get access to or go to, all right? And I think that is one place that is a very interesting space. And when you combine that with the Oshogbo Grove, because she, straddled both spaces, I think it will be very, very interesting to document this in VR. And it's already something that, we've been talking about.
You spent time there already?
Where?
In Oshogbo.
Yeah. Well, I've made some short films, regular films, in the Grove and in her house. I've filmed there, been in there. It's kind of dark and spooky, but we can make it interesting. It can look interesting. So I think that yes, it's something that I would love to explore in more detail to document that space. Yeah.
Bruce Onagwapeya.
I haven't been to any of his spaces, although there's the late Chief Rashid Badamasi. Yes, there was an event that he had in his place in Ikorodu, and Uncle Tam took me there, and we spent a whole day, talking, and I was just watching from a distance this legend. I couldn't even come to say hello. But I think that those are places that I would also love to. So that's the thing. I go to this place, I fall in love with the place, I want to document it. I want to film it, whether as a flatty or as 360. So that's it. I would love to go to his space in, I think there's one in Mushin.
Yeah, there's one, his studio is in Mushin, and that's very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, and then the one in Abraka as well. Yes, so
space.
It would be a function of, but we talked about it a few minutes ago, so many stories to tell. Which one do you go for first? How do you get it funded? How do you go and make these films? So there's so many things that you have to consider before you decide, okay, this is the project that I want to do.
Just to segue a bit, how much time would for example, how much time would it take to do great justice to a VR project of a living legend or even a late legend? But I know that, of course, there's huge barriers to entry with the finances in terms of just the technology.
Yeah.
But how is this? Is it a discouraging idea when you think about working in 2D or versus virtual reality? How much more time would it take? Of course, you do all this work to have a 2, 3, 8 minute, film.
Yeah. Well, ideally, you shouldn't spend less than 2 months, making a film. If you want to do it really well, you shouldn't. But sometimes, we work really fast. Like the realities of Demas, thanks to Ms. Tayo Gumbi, we were able to, she forced us to make it in like 2 weeks, which was, really not very healthy for us, but we had to do it. But ideally, you should spend like maybe 2 months, 3 months. There's pre-production, there's research. You have to meet with the character, you go to the space, check it out, come back, make a storyboard, and then decide when to go and film. All of that takes time. And in the middle of all that, you also have other things that you're doing, other projects that you're working on. So yeah, maybe like 2-3 months to make it really well and work with the right people that you need to work with, at least.
So I wanted to just take us now to Demas. The Lagos art scene has been buzzing in recent times. In the last month alone, we screened Demas Woko, a documentary on Demas Woko at Lights Camera Africa Film Festival, which is a short documentary which is absolutely beautiful, made by Remy Vaughan Richards, which just again takes us down memory lane and just basically unravels this gem to us. The Zaria Art Society is being immortalized and celebrated yet again through new exhibitions in the Kia Center, which is curated by Art House Contemporary. And we're fortunate now at Artex to have this commission that you've been asked to make on the realities of Demas, which take us into his studio, his New Culture Studios in Ibadan. And it's really, I highly recommend that you see it, because we read about Demas Woko on paper, in books, and even in these documentaries. But this is like a real immersion into this space and to really understand the magnitude of his contributions. So I don't know, I want you to talk a bit more about the actual process of making this film.
Okay.
I know, and this is probably not, I know for a fact that this film this is not the end of this,
No.
that there will be a non-abridged version.
Yes.
Where we can really delve in. But can you just talk a bit about it, talk about the man, talk about the process, talk about access, talk about all those things in making realities of Demas?
Okay, so, well, it started off with, I've always been, the first time I met him was maybe 4 years ago. There was a showing at the Kia showroom, and, I saw some of his works, and I was really, really fascinated. So we walked up to him and said, hello, I'm Joel, I'm a filmmaker, I would like to come and make a film on you. And he said, oh yeah, sure, come to my studio. Can you come to Delta State? I said, yeah, we'll come. So, but we never did. Fast forward a couple of months ago, I said to Taya, you're doing ArtX, can we make a VR piece around this man? And she loved the idea. And so we approached him. But it was interesting because he, at the time, gave his blessing to make this film, but declined to be in the film. So that kind of posed an interesting challenge for us. So what do we do? And then we spoke to his son, his grandson actually, and I was asking him, say, what really does your father love to do? Of everything, I mean, he's in the arts, he does everything. He's a poet, all of that, he's a composer. And he said, well, of everything, what he loves is architecture and design. It's okay, fine. So we'll build this film around that, right? We will document his spaces and talk about it and talk about the inspiration behind it, his work process and all of that. And so that was basically what we did. And obviously the question then again was, so which of the spaces do we document, considering how much time that we have, right? We can go to Asaba, we can go to Benin, we can go to Enugu, we can go to Ibadan. Ibadan at the time seemed like, just the easiest that we could do. So we decided to go to Ibadan. And really, Ibadan was where it all started for him. Really, that's where he learned how to be a draftsman before going to Zaria. That's where he built his New Culture Studio. That's where he made his first project, which was the Dominican Chapel in Ibadan. And I think that it was just, it wasn't a hard decision to make, to document those spaces, and using his grandson now as the narrator who would tell us about his grandfather and what inspired his grandfather, because Uno, that's the grandson, has spent pretty much all his life with his grandfather. He sort of knows him, he can speak for him, quote unquote. And so that's really how we approached it. The rest was just technical stuff.
There's some interesting parts in the film where, so the dancers,
Yes.
so in the amphitheater, I mean, it's really, it's amazing, the scale of this. I've never been to this space, but I just went to the space 15 minutes before the talk. And just the sense of scale of this amphitheater that Demas Nwoko designed and built by hand.
Yeah.
There's a ruggedness that you're able to show us through this film, and it's almost, you just feel like you were there. You even feel like you're one of the workers. Like those scenes where those scenes where you can show us almost like height, scale, occupancy, emptiness. Like how did you create those?
Yeah, but that's all technical stuff.
Is that technical? Okay.
But one of the things that the space, the amphitheater in Ibadan is sort of like, illustrates in some way a dream that wasn't quite fulfilled or wasn't quite finished. Because I kept asking, this is so big, it looks so good, but it's not quite complete. And he said to me, well, at some point, there were some issues, and, his grandfather had to leave Ibadan and go back to Delta State, and so I said to him, so what's happening now? And that was where the dancers came in. And if you noticed, somewhere in the beginning of the film, it was empty. That's what it is. But towards the end, it was populated. And using that to show her what the son is trying to do now. So what the son does now is he tries to get young creatives in Ibadan and the environs to come and use the space. And what he said to us was, look, this is the only thing that would give my father joy. The fact that this place is in use, right? It's not about completing it. It's not about putting a roof over it, but that it's in use. He designed his spaces for communities to use them. And so we tried as much as possible to capture that in the film. Like I said, the rest is all technical stuff. I want to teach you how to make VR.
I was saying, so obviously, I'm really glad that as one of the many, many agents in this space who are adding to the documentation task through books, through documentary, through exhibitions, through conversations, and now we now have VR, right? Which we're really glad for. And just before we came here, you were just so excited about the possibilities of VR in schools and how this could be a real education, game changer. Is that a reality? Is that something that, in your knowledge of our Nigeria today, is something possible? Is it affordable? Can that be VR and using VR in secondary schools or primary schools? I mean, how is this? Is this a pipe dream? Because you said that, but is it really possible?
Anything is possible.
I want you to tell me exactly about how.
So first of all, there's a lady walked up to me and she said, "Oh, I just saw the film and I was really excited. I'm an architecture student, and I've read about Demas Nwoko, but I've never been to any of his spaces. And just putting on this headset, was such a great experience for me, and I would like it to come and show this in my school, to other students." So that in itself shows that, okay, there is probably a desire for content like this, right? And in terms of it being affordable, all right, there are really affordable ways to show VR, even on your smartphone with a Google Cardboard. Yes, you just have the app on your smartphone, and with a Google Cardboard, you can watch. So it's not as prohibitive as people think. Okay. The big question right now is content. All right, because there are people who are concerning themselves with making it more accessible to everyone. However, what's going to be on it, okay? So I'm a content creator, and that's what I'm concerned about. So whilst, we have some people who are worrying themselves about how do we make this more accessible, how do we make cheaper headsets, how do we make it cooler, and all of that, I worry about the content, creating this content in VR. And remember also that you don't have to watch VR content only via a headset. You can still watch it on a mobile phone, just like that. Okay. So there are different ways of experiencing 360-degree videos, especially if they're not sort of like interactive videos, right? So I'm concerned about creating the content. I'll keep creating the content whilst, we devise and think of ways to make it more accessible to people, to schools, and everyone else.
So, okay. That kind of leads me to talk about the content that you created before this.
Yeah.
And maybe you can also talk about some of this content. I mean, obviously, you, as a creative in your own right, choose your stories that you want to highlight. So tell me, of course, you're the man of the day in this space at the moment. We're very proud of you. But tell me a bit more. Tell us about the Daughters of Chibok. Tell us about that journey, the beginning of it, the transformational power of that film in your life, and of course, talk about the win in Venice. Talk about, just take us on that journey of the Daughters of Chibok. Of course, it's nothing to do with modern art, but as far as this call that you have, and maybe we all have, to document important stories, to transport us to places that we ordinarily cannot go to, and have these things, sort of for posterity. Yeah. You've done, over and beyond. So tell me about Daughters of Chibok. Tell us about the Venice win.
Well, I mean, so Chibok was a place that I've heard of. Everyone has heard of it. Very few people have ever been there. And so it's somewhere that I've always wanted to go there if I would ever find the opportunity.
On holiday or?
No. Just to go and document.
Was it because of course, the kidnapping? So the backdrop is the kidnapping of the girls, the Chibok girls?
Yes. And at the time, obviously, there were so many conflicting stories, so you don't know which one to believe. Is it true? Did it happen? Did it not happen? And so from a storytelling perspective, my curiosity was aroused, and I wanted to go there and find out for myself. And so early this year, we had an opportunity to go there. I was making a regular film, and then we went there and saw the people, spoke to them, spoke to the women. And then the question for me was, so how do I document this place now, this experience? What do I use? And so I decided to use VR. And the reason why I chose VR was because, same thing, I always say, with VR, I can take people to Chibok. And Chibok is not a place that you can just say, let me enter motor and go there and come back. You fly to Yola, and then you drive 6 hours, to Chibok. And then before you can even get into Chibok, you were stopped at the gate and asked by the army, who are you coming to see? Why are you coming to Chibok? That's the way it is, at least up till 2 months ago. All right? So how can I transport people to Chibok with them not having to get on a plane and driving? It was VR. And so we made this film in VR where we were documenting life in Chibok, and what these women were going through, because my focus was on the women, the mothers of the missing girls. And the original intention was to use the film as a vehicle to drive support for the women. There was no talk about Venice or film festivals or whatever. It was just show it to the right people and see how we can get support for the women. And then a friend of mine, Judith, of Imisi 3D, said to me, send this to Venice. Or send it to a film festival and make sure it's a competitive one. I'm like, why? She said, just send it. So she searched and then she sent me a link, and I emailed it to the Venice Film Festival. They loved it. They invited us. That in itself was a big deal for us because, we felt that this was an opportunity for us to mix with the biggest names in VR globally. And so that was great. That was enough for us. And then towards the end of the festival, we were told that, we wouldn't have to go. We'd have to wait until the very end. And I said, why? They said, well, they'll communicate to me later. A day before, they now said, oh, so you're going to pick up an award tomorrow. And the rest, they say, is history. But the feedback that we got, which is what still inspires me to keep making content in VR, was that everyone kept saying, wow, we've heard about this story. And thank you for showing us this film. Thank you for taking us there. Americans, Chileans, British, everyone. Because it was a global story. But how many people have been there? It's easy to carry the, the hashtag, bring back our girls and stand. But, do you have the mind to go there? But with VR, you can take them there. They can see for themselves what's going on there. And so if you bring back to even what we're trying to do with the artists, it's the same thing to, take them to these spaces, take people to these spaces that they might not be able to get access to. And that's it. Create these immersive experiences for them.
What's in terms of content,
Yeah.
so you were talking about that being the crucial bit.
Yeah.
So tell me, maybe talk about it, maybe something that you are planning to, what's new?
What's new? Well, I mean, it's considering the feedback that we've gotten even from the realities of demos. So there's talk now about, can we do more? Are there any more spaces? And there are spaces that we can document in VR. That's something that is on our minds. But I'm also very big on social impact stories, human impact stories. So there are a few ideas in my head, but the way my head works, there's always a bunch of things until one decides that it's time. So I really can't say what's next right now. It's we'll finish this film properly, and then move on to the next one.
I was saying, you were asking, you mentioned earlier about interactive VR. This is a bit
Yes.
technical, but you said linear. You were trying to delineate between interactive and linear.
Well, yeah, so
Linear. So
interactive is where the user actually, the user's actions trigger something.
Okay.
Okay, so, and most times they use it for games. It's used in games, but there are also like interactive stories now where you do something and what you do triggers something else, and then, it goes on like that. So it's about like user interaction as opposed to linear where you plug it on, you play, you don't have to do anything. So there are different ways to sort of approach VR storytelling. So it could be interactive or it could be linear. It depends. And obviously, with interactive, then it gets a bit more complicated because you have to have special headsets to use that have controllers that you will use to trigger those actions. So the question is, what's the story that I'm trying to tell? Does it make sense to be interactive, or can I just keep it linear? Those are all the questions that you'll ask.
You, in the last few weeks, and this is a lot, I think we're now taking some of the questions. We're going to take questions from the audience, but I have one more for you.
Yes.
Just to sort of highlight, tell me a bit more about this engagement, this third level. You keep talking about VR as a third level. It's almost like you have this creed. How VR is for you the third level of engagement, and for you this is of course important in storytelling.
Yeah.
Tell me about these levels of engagement and how for you, tell me about the levels of engagement, of course, because I don't even understand what that means in terms of the third level, first, second. To shed a bit more light on this power of this third level of engagement that you keep talking about.
No, you make it sound like it's a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. So I say that, for every story, the first thing most times is that you hear it, right? It's just audio. Oh, so and so happened, yada, 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 right? That's just the first level of engagement for any story. Yeah. Second level is maybe a picture, maybe a video, whatever, all right? The third level, right, is, and that's what I think, is VR, where you're not quite there physically. You cannot touch and feel, but you're there, if that makes any sense, right? So, for instance, a few people who saw the VR film said, now I want to go to Ibadan. Now I want to go to those spaces. And these are people who have read the book, The Architecture of Demas. They've heard about him, and then they now saw the film in VR. It was as if they were there, but they also knew that, okay, yes, I'm here, but, I wish I could touch and feel these stone walls. I wish I could walk around, all right? And I think that it's important to have people experience that quote-unquote third level of engagement, which would trigger them to want to say, you know what, I would like to explore more. I want to now see the real thing or feel the real thing, okay? But even if they're not able to, for any reason, like in the case of Chibok, where you have security challenges or distance, that third level of engagement is enough for some people, it's powerful enough to get that engagement and build empathy or connection, whatever it is that you're trying to get as the filmmaker.
Thank you, Joel. I have some questions that I've just received from the audience, so these are all for you, obviously. Are there any more coming? Okay, so Wale Ayola wants to know, are you mentoring people as regards this art form? So you in some of our conversations, you talked about how few VR artists there actually are.
There's one of them there, the lady in black. She is.
So are you mentoring people as regards this art form? Wale wants to know.
Yes, in VR 360 Stories, we always have like young people coming around. The crew that I work with are really young people who I mentor and I teach them, I train them. In fact, when we went to Venice, I went with one of them, just for the exposure, just to see what is going on out there, so we don't stay here and think that, we're the local champions. There are people who are doing great things.
Do you do this through your studio?
Yes.
Yes.
What's
the name of your studio?
VR 360 Stories. Yes. So yes, we do. But obviously there's a criteria, yeah.
What is the criteria?
Passion, plenty.
How is scripting, I don't have a name for this, who's asking this. Yeah. How is scripting a 2D film different from scripting the narratives of a 3D film?
I don't see any difference. I guess if there's a difference, it would be, how do I write a 10-minute film that would be as impactful as if it was a 1-hour film? Cram all that information into it. All right. So, for instance, like with the realities of Demas, we had this really long transcript from his son, from the interview that we did, and we had to prune that down to a 1-pager. That was tough, but it is what it is. So I really don't see any difference in.
Just more compact.
It's really about the story. How do you want to tell the story? Is the act there, right? If you can put it in beginning, middle, end, it doesn't matter. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 5 minutes, it could be 20 minutes.
This question, again, I don't know who's asking this. Watching the realities of Demas, I noticed your use of dance and music and a bit of theater. Would you say these forms of art are very inspirational to your documentaries?
To my documentaries, no. To this documentary, yes. It's.
Are you sure?
Yeah. No. What I mean is that dance, theater, and all of that. It depends on what's the story that I'm trying to tell. I don't have to infuse it into every piece that I make. But it was important for this piece. It was important for that space. It was only used in one space. All right, and it was important because that's what happens there. That's what it was designed for. Even though it doesn't happen all the time, all right, but it was designed for that, and it was important for me to show how that space was being used in that context. That's why Baba designed it. Back in the 70s, all right, we had the likes of Wole Soyinka coming there, Ola Balogun coming there, performing. All right, and so yes, we cannot recreate that time, but we still have younger creatives who are coming there now to use the space. So it was important to use that. But in terms of my documentaries, I'm very big on music. Like it's very important for me. It conveys a lot of emotion. All right, so in this film, for instance, we worked with Gerald Eze, who plays the flute. Very, very interesting. Very interesting guy.
He plays the oja, the traditional Igbo flute.
Yes, and we used it only at the end of the film when we were talking about Pademas. You didn't hear that sound anywhere else in the film, only at the end when we're talking about him. And I feel like, Pademas is for those who don't know, he's actually royalty. He's, the son of a king. His father was a king, and so in Igbo culture, when a king is coming, the flutes, the dance, and all of that, just to herald. And so when we're talking about him, we decided to use that piece there. And, I think it worked.
The last one, before we all say goodnight, is how do you feel virtual reality film enhances or takes away from the ways in which we experience the physical environment? I think you've touched on this a bit, but maybe you can just how do you feel virtual reality film enhances or takes away from the ways in which we experience the physical environment?
I don't think it takes away. I think it enhances, especially when you consider the fact that it is a place that, like I said, you ordinarily would not be able to get access to. So it has enhanced the experience for you beyond a picture. Yeah, or a book. It has enhanced it for you. I don't think it takes away. It has its value. It has its uses. It's still a great tool. It's a great medium, all right? And my desire is to keep exploring it and using it to push the envelope of storytelling as much as I can.
What can the community, this same community in which you're creating, what can we do to help you make more VR films, tell more stories, create more content? You, Joel.
Me?
Yes.
That's an interesting one.
You have an opportunity to essentially just make your wish list.
My wish list.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that the biggest challenge facing VR right now is really like funding to create content, like that support system, that support structure. And the reason why I talk about it is because I've seen what happens in other climes. A friend of mine, Jumoke, said to me, and it stayed with me since then. She said, look, you see, with VR, we have an opportunity not to play catch-up because it's new everywhere. It's early days for everyone. All right? But if we do not support it the way VR filmmakers in the West are getting support, 5-10 years from now, we will start to play catch-up. It's like when you have, when two children are born, two babies are born, poor Peking child, poor man child, rich man child, all right? They look the same, but give them 2-3 years. With nourishment, you will begin to see the difference, okay? So that's the same thing. It's early days. It needs the support. For people like us who, we make 2D films and we're able to struggle and, use our personal resources and just labor of love, passion, pour it into it. But how many of such people, can do that? And so you now have a community, a country like Nigeria or Lagos where you have so many young creatives who would love to go into it, but because it's so expensive, they cannot go into it. And then you just have only a handful of people doing it. That doesn't build an industry. That doesn't build a community. All right? So I think it's really about the support. And it's not just for me. It's for everyone who wants to do this. All right? As a community, the VR community needs the support as much as we can get, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joel. I think that brings us to the end. Can we just walk off the stage? So I wanted to say, first of all, I wanted to say thank you. I don't know what the program is for the film for Artex, but I highly and strongly recommend that you see The Realities of Demas. Where can we see it after today? Actually, that's another question. Where?
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 I think Artex will post something about where it can be seen. Yes, Tayo will do that.
So thank you.
It will be available, and if anyone comes to the studios, either Imise 3D or VR 360 Stories, they are both in the Yaba area. Just come in and you can watch it.
What's your Instagram handle? How can we find you after today?
Kachi Benson.
Kachi Benson.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Joel, for talking to us, and thank you guys
Thanks everyone for listening to all the talk.
Being with us.
Thank you.
If you are interested in joining the talks, they resume again tomorrow from 3 p.m. and I will see you then. Good night.